Okay, so there's in this moment in time, we're in a space, we're in a liminal space
Yeah,
where previous forms of agreement have broken down.
yeah,
So we no longer have any real, or we don't have a toolkit that can enable us to actually find a way to agree. Like it's not that we're disagreeing because we're disagreeable. It's literally
yeah.
because the toolkit that provides us the capacity to agree has broken down. The thing that's below that is the mechanism or the process by which we find something which is in alignment. Our friend Yasuhiko, alignment beyond agreement. Do you know Yasuhiko?
No, I don't.
So my friend Yasuhiko, alignment beyond agreement. Um, and this is what we're talking about: is that music is a instrumentality which
Mhm.
provides us with alignment, absent and therefore prior to agreement.
Mhm.
And one might imagine that it's like a well. We can go back to the well, and we have to say, okay, we need to now innovate. We need to find a way to further this evolution of music that you've been speaking about, to constitute a new muse that is adequate to the moment that we are in, to
Mhm.
provide us with an instrumentality of alignment that can then support a toolkit that
Mhm.
can provision agreement, the level of agreement that we need. Like we didn't agree on everything. We just need to agree on enough to be able to continue to move forward without
Yeah,
fucking everything up. Nice.
yeah.
Throw temporality in there. I think there's something really cool to be unlocked in that. You hinted at
Temporality.
time. You hinted at time a few times,
Yeah,
and I noticed like, I'm interested. So let's throw it in there.
yeah. Before I just want to comment on the last thing you said, which is that we need a new music.
Mm-hmm.
In essence, and I just as you said that, I was like, yeah, what would that be? And I feel like there's always new music coming in, and it feels like it's always coming from the future, pulling us towards something.
Mm.
When we listen to at least when I listen to what I would say cutting edge music now, it feels like, oh, like I've never heard that before. It's from somewhere else. And I'd imagine, when jazz first came and had that experience, like there's from a nonlinear timeline, we could say music also comes from the future to pull us towards a future as well. So when I think about new music, well, I think it's always happening, and I also feel like part of my mission right now to teach music as a mindfulness practice is we have begun to associate, especially in the last few generations, music in a very specific frame due to the industrialization and commercialization of it, which I wouldn't say is a bad thing, but it is a thing. 300 years ago, I could only imagine that the general human's experience of music was way different. There wasn't an industry.
Mm-hmm.
There was just music. And 300 years ago, it was rare that most people even heard very much of it, in a very diverse way. So I think part of our perception of music has been through this filter of rock star, professional musician, artist, and all of these types of things. Whereas I do have a guitar with me, that the basics of music hold true. So, for example, these two notes together experientially create a sense of balance. That's the function of the ratio of these two notes, the relationship, the harmony. So I wonder if we need a new music or if we need more people experiencing music at the participation level, playing music at that basic level, where it's not necessarily about a song or an album or, the next new thing, but it's about how evenly can we experience those notes. And bringing music back to its most basic experience rather than something
Mm.
a means of expression and all of that. So
So the solve for an overly complicated age is a rediscovery of the most basic.
yes,
Yeah,
direct experience.
yeah.
Yes.
There's a lot of things that resonate there, right? fact, it's interesting. I notice in myself that there's an overwhelmingly large number of things that resonate there. Let me see a few things. One is a sense of yearning. If I feel that, I imagine a life that feels like the music you just played. I imagine a life where every aspect of life is at that level of, say, simplicity, of primariness. There's a yearning. I notice I yearn for that. It feels super, yes, very right. And also a relaxation, like, oh, okay, there's more to it than that. And you know, this thing we have, this phrase, was it first there was a mountain, then there was no mountain, then there was a mountain? This isn't a call to go back. What happens, I think, is when we relax into that more primary, a vastness is made available.
Yes.
It is currently held back by the complicatedness that we are burdened by.
Definitely. Yeah. And to play music like that takes finding that within. That's part of the magic that I've been discovering in my own path, and as a teacher, it's that part of the magic with music as a musician in relating the experience to a listener, because it's basically, I think about sound that we're releasing sound into the world, because that's really what's happening. The sound exists, we're just releasing it, and somebody's receiving it. As a musician, we're doing both at the same time. We are releasing the physical sound, receiving it, and then releasing more sound. And what ends up happening is there's an internal reception that it begins to open, where we're receiving sound from somewhere else that is before the physical sound. In yogic terms, anahata, the unstruck sound. The deeper I can connect to that sound, the more I find the listener can connect to it too. There's something about that it brings it to life, and vice versa. When I'm playing, the deeper the listener is connecting, the more it helps me connect to it. So the simplicity of being, I would say, is the clear internal experience of having direct connection with the sound, and following it to a depth that's more than just the periphery. Oh, those are notes. That within every note, there are technically, or at least theoretically, an infinite amount of harmonics or overtones that's produced by it. Obviously, we have limited how much we can actually hear by our bandwidth of our physicality, but conceptually, there's an infinite amount of little smaller waves drifting off of that one fundamental wave. So there's a lot to tune into. And to the degree that we're able to tune into that depth of perception, in a sense where we are tuning into an infinite moment through a temporal experience. So if we were to bring back time into this thing, good timing, right? I think one of the things, and I've been really exploring this concept of time, and it feels in the connection with music. I think when a lot of people think about time, they're thinking about like, oh, it is 3:35, or like time coordinates, which is what we generally use the clock for. But time is something different than, oh, it's this time. Just like an address is something different. That an address marks space, just like our clock marks time. But obviously space is infinite and time is infinite, but we have a perception of it within various boundaries that we perceive. So anyway, thinking about time more as vibration, as cycles, that our experience of time is something that is dynamic, that at least from our perception is always moving forward towards the future. That there's a perception of past, there's a perception of or at least an anticipation of future. And all of that is always within the present moment that we are in. We can never be outside of the present moment, but we can direct our attention in the present moment to moments that are not present. So thinking about, or at least beginning to perceive of time as something that's flowing forward, perhaps also flowing towards us, depends on our perspective of it, but that it's dynamic, it's moving. And our, I'm not a physicist by any degree, but my little, bits of understanding of, relativity and the connection between time and space is that part of it, or at least maybe everything, has to do with the spin of the Earth. That is creating a certain relationship between the twisting of space, the fabric of space. In short, the regular cycles of the Earth spinning around itself and the sun creates consistency. If the Earth spun 22 hours one day and 27 another day and 33 another day, that would be a very irregular thing, and it wouldn't be in orbit, and life on the planet assumingly wouldn't exist, or at least would be drastically different than what we are. So in a sense, looking at time as cycles or frequency of vibration, the Earth spinning around itself is a cycle, the Earth spinning around the sun is a cycle, that the subatomic layer, all those spins are cycles, and vibration is cycles. I mean, sound is the cycle of vibration that we are perceiving at the auditory level, as well as kinesthetic level. And that's a little bit of part of, I think, the function of it. So when we begin to think about time, again, rather than thinking coordinate of time, clock time, more of that time is always flowing forward, and we are always part of that. Now, our perception of time, I would say, is not very attuned for most of us. Where does the time go? Time flies when we're having fun. Time. We could think about the 3 minutes before 3 when in high school, looking at the clock and how slow it began to tick. Our perception of time changes, and from my study and kind of hypothesis, and part of what I'm digging into is that, well, it has to do with our brain waves. Just really simple, our neural activity. That when they're firing differently, our experience of time changes. And our experience of time is kind of always in flux because our brain waves are generally fluctuating to a degree that's outside of our agency. What music begins to do is create a regulation of our time sense. So rhythm, for example, is, pulse. The more steady it is, the more equal measure of time it is. The more equal and regular that pulse is, something begins to happen. So if we think about a little bit like if we're building a building, we're measuring space. And if we understand the architectural balance, which is actually the same ratios as music, we can get into that. But if I'm going to build a wall here and a wall here, it's good to know where that middle point is for structural integrity. It's good to know where the middle point between those 2 points are. The more accurate my ruler is, the more accurate I'll be able to do that. Our time ruler is kind of stretching a lot. So rhythm begins to help us regulate that at the internal level, which I would say creates a time structure in a way. And what is that structure of time? Well, it's the expanded present moment. So I said before that we're always in the present moment, but maybe we are drifting off, thinking about future things, thinking about past things. We're not present for the present moment, but our attention is only available in the present moment. This sound only exists now. And as the sound continues to move into the future or expanding the present moment, that now just gets, a longer duration. It's engaged for a longer cycle. So this time structure, rhythm, helps attune our attention to stay present for a longer cycle of time, where a present moment meets a next present moment, a future present moment, with equal measure. The more balanced and regular that is, the more that temporal structure begins to establish itself, and something magical happens. And I think part of that is that it is expanding our temporal awareness away from a very small segment of time that we're experiencing moment. When that's happening, we are dysregulated. The faster that is, the more compressed that moment is, the more we're going to feel anxious, intense, like waiting. If we're in a rush and we're waiting in line at the checkout, 2 minutes feels like it's 20 because our moment is very compressed. So our subjective experience of time is different. But by being able to develop the ability to hold a spatial temporal structure for a longer time, it begins to expand our present moment. In doing so, we begin to feel more relaxed, more at ease, more in the flow. And we are able to meet a future present moment with regularity. And with music, I know you have a ton to say, and I so do I. It seems with music that happens at the more micro level, where it's like this moment, new measure. But how can that also expand into a longer, greater macro time? So if we are more aware of the micro moments, which would be, roughly around anything less than a second or more or less than 2 seconds, a little span of moments, the more we begin to tune our time sense at that micro level, the more we realize and develop the ability to tune our time sense at the macro level. Every day can become a beat. We can begin to get traction in our life because we're making choices in the present moment to meet a future present moment. And we're able to meet it with regularity. That creates a rhythm of flow, just like it does with music, but at a more micro or more macro level that, at least I found in my life, it can create a lot of success.
Success. Well, the term that came up for me was this term continuity.
Yeah.
Jesus Marimba. Let's see. Synesthesia is a tricky business when I'm talking with you, man. Let's see. So I had an image of, I think, the interior dome of a mosque. Very complex geometry. Okay. And then this notion of continuity, and then the concept of resonance. And okay, so let's see. Okay, and then natural cycles, or something like, as you said, the structure, the function of those two notes was balance. The proposition that we are sitting in or supported by an actual reality that has a structure to it, and we can work with that.
Right.
It's kind of a nice thing to know, right? Hey, wait, reality has a structure to it, and we can work with that. And by virtue of working with it, good things can happen. Like, it's real nice. If you try to play music, if you don't understand how those notes work, it's gonna be rough. If you get it, suddenly it gets easier to create more beauty, which gets easier to create more beauty, and it continues to expand.
Yeah.
So let's see, if I can combine these things together into the kind of the amalgam, continuity, mosque, structure, resonance. Okay, resonance. Resonance speaks to the notion of the degree to which we construct something that's characteristics are in alignment with the natural structure of reality, so that the thing that is flowing flows through effortlessly.
Yes.
So if I have an antenna, and that antenna is attuned to the same frequency as the signal is being broadcast, suddenly the signal to noise ratio spikes close to 1, right? And if it's slightly out of tune, if it's out of resonance, the signal to noise ratio quickly collapses close to 0. This is a very specific narrowband of the degree to which our instrumentality, our form of embodied beingness, is in attunement with the natural structure that allows a certain kind of thing to go from impossible to kind of guaranteed or super easy. Okay. 2, the moment, the present moment. The ability to notice if there's a constellation like that, like the dome in the mosque, of an arrangement of relationship, very complex in time, or the nature of time, the natural structure of time. The natural structure of time, all the aspects, as you said, the spinning of the earth, the orbit of the earth, the movement of the stars, the turning of the seasons, menstrual flows, like breathing in and out, like all these characteristics that are happening. And there's a natural structure that's happening. And there's a way to be able to be attuned to that natural structure and begin to come into harmony with that, which
Yes.
begins to allow a continuity. Right? This is an expansion of the moment, expands, 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 expands. And in principle, if one can find the right way of connecting with it all the way, complete continuity, oneness in the mystical sense.
Yes.
And I don't mean hand wavy. I mean super not hand wavy. I mean for real. And affordant to the thing that humanity is most needing now.
Yes.
Right, practical. Very practical.